Perspective, Arnab? Mostly, he's taking a day off from investigating scandals in Indian society and exposing corruption to the entire subcontinent. Well, but apply your brain, sir, to these sort of questions for
now
for
that
a minute or two.
You've portrayed me as some kind of journalistic Robin Hood. I liked Sam's presentation incredibly. To summarize it, it tells me about the past, the present, and the future. Let me begin by saying that the hegemony of Western media has to end. Western media has had it too good for too long, and it has ruined the balance of power that's required, not just in politics and society.
I was told you were a shy and retiring journalist.
Now, since Sam started with numbers, I'd like to share some numbers. Sam's numbers were very interesting. If you look at his numbers, he says that in India, 91% of Indians follow cross-border news. So Indians are most interested about the world. The least interested in the world are the Americans and the British. Only 44 to 46% of people follow cross-border news. But US and UK together contribute 74% of the source of global news, whereas all of Asia contributes 3%. If I were to summarize that in one line, it basically says that Indians are the least insular people, most open-minded. Americans are the most insular people, right? But they have complete dominance over the global narrative in terms of news. I'll share a couple of other numbers with that. I have said recently that India will be the next media capital of the world. And I want to share with this audience why I think so. We have 99,000 publications in India. We have 13,761 registered newspapers in India. We have 404 news channels in India which run 24/7, and we don't have one single global news network. Now, if I look at Sam's figures and the figures that I'm presenting to you, and begin with an assumption, and I'll wrap up, begin with an assumption that there is a problem in the world in terms of balance. It is from countries like India, which speak English, which are democracies, where the challenge to the global news hegemony is about to come. And I just think it's so necessary from a balancing of power perspective. The Americans are very concerned about the entry of Russia into the Middle East. They are more concerned that they are going to lose their balance rather than establishing a new balance. Similarly, in the world of media as well, the time has come to provide a serious counter to global media sources like BBC and CNN, which have been hegemonistic for far too long.
In a few more moments, you will be every bit as popular in Moscow as you clearly are in Delhi. But you use big words like hegemony. Right, here's your manifesto. This moment, this day, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? You've given okay. Numbers that talk about balance and hegemony.
Yeah.
India is a huge, prosperous, rich country. What are you going to do about it?
I don't know how prosperous and rich we are, but we are going to be prosperous and rich. But I'll share some statistics with you. Look at the potential of a country like India. Today we have 100 million mobile phones in India. 3 years from now, we'll have 500 million mobile phones in India.
With respect, that was not my question.
Okay.
You say the gap is in India's international reach,
yes,
and the insularity of the UK and the US. What are you, as an Indian media executive, going to do to redress the international balance, if at all?
The first thing that I would do would be to remind the Americans of what they have done in the last 20 years in the world. As the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai said about the Americans, one of the delightful things about Americans is they have absolutely no historical memory. They don't remember. Or Gore Vidal said that the USA is the United States of amnesia. The fact of the matter is that you must remember today, and I'll only ask one question to this audience. It is 12 years to the day that a theory of the weapons of mass destruction was fed, and, if I may say so, amplified by the Western media. Everyone bought into it. There were cheerleaders. Nobody seriously questioned it. At one point of time, there was an article in the Newsweek magazine which said, it doesn't matter if Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, but the fact is they shouldn't get any. So what I'm going to do, in a very succinct reply to your question, is to restore the balance by creating a global media environment that is not located out of Washington, New York, or London. You create that global capital, you'll have a balance of power. 10 years back, you would have never imagined that India would be the software capital of the world. Today, we are the software capital of the world, and I think that's where we are headed.
Right. I think you've set out your stall extraordinarily well. As against a backdrop of globalization, you'll get homogenous, globalized news. That's a danger, and it will be boring news. Is there a danger that your vision of the world might lead in that direction?
It depends entirely on what you call boring. I find asymmetrical news boring. I find news that emanates only from certain parts of the world boring. Now,
so
Nigel,
you agree with John Simpson?
Yeah,
there's a grotesque selectiveness.
I do, and I would like to substantiate it with 3 particular examples. We can go at the 80s, when Ronald Reagan described the Mujahideen as, Rambo-type people who were simply fighting with handheld weapons against a foreign invader. And when he met the Mujahideen, and that was covered, and that is where the ISIS story goes back to. Have people actually looked back and connected the dots? They haven't. The point is, look at the Paris attacks, and let's look at the coverage of the Paris attacks to answer your question. Yes. Here we are. The Paris attacks have generated a lot of global coverage, up to the point where we have talked this morning about a global coalition to fight ISIS and why it cannot happen. You would know that on the 26th of November 2008, in the Mumbai attacks, 165 Indians were killed in 4 locations. In the Paris attacks, it was 1, by 10 terrorists sent from Pakistan, and that was the greatest act of bloodshed which happened. I saw that
was covered extensively all around the world.
They weren't. Its coverage is also, you've got to look at coverage in terms of whether you cover or you cover with the intensity, passion, and for the length of time that you've covered the Paris attacks. You see, we must be open in this forum. The point that I'm making is the Paris attacks generated universal outrage they should have done. And the scale of the attack has now prompted what is close to an international effort against ISIS. Before there was Paris, when Mumbai was attacked, there weren't as many news outlets in the US or the UK who took up the job, and I'm not talking about coverage, of sanctions against Pakistan. And the reason for that is because the US has been hand in glove with what is happening in Pakistan. I find it very surprising, and maybe people in this audience don't know about this particular story. If I were to tell you that the person who carried out the surveillance was one of the masterminds of the attacks in Mumbai, was an American citizen by the name of David Coleman Headley, who was not just an American citizen, he was an FBI double agent. An FBI double agent was the mastermind of the Mumbai attacks. He went over to the dark side, and he was a double agent for both the Lashkar-e-Toiba as well as... Just a minute. No. Allow me to complete my point.
I will let you complete your point, but I want just to put in that we cannot deal with in great detail with historic conspiracy theories on this platform.
No, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a very relevant point. I find it very surprising that only one American investigative journalistic portal called ProPublica did the story of David Coleman Headley. And the reason I'm highlighting it is, please consider, if today it was proven that there was a similar person responsible for the Paris attacks, what kind of coverage would that have got, as opposed to the coverage that this story got? Now, we can say, how many American news outlets and British outlets have said, how can you get into a plea bargain with this particular individual? The point I'm making is one simple point. There is, I wouldn't say bias or prejudice, but there has been an asymmetry which perhaps, and I would give the benefit of doubt, stems from the locational prejudices that come in, that when things happen, when they are closer to you, you report it in greater depth. When they happen away from you, you do report it, but not with the same intensity and passion. And I think that is one of the reasons today we need a balance of powers in the media world.
Are we not confusing two things? Domestic news services and international news services represented here today. Surely the asymmetry is not the same. There's a problem with domestic news services, I agree, but that is not what we're here to discuss today.
I'm talking about, to clarify, I am talking about global news sources. I'm not talking about CNN domestic or BBC domestic. Okay. I'm talking about their global coverage, and I find a gap between the way they covered Mumbai and the way they covered Paris.
Okay. In a sense, Anna, you've already addressed the problem, but maybe at just greater length. Does that does that view chime with, if it's a short one?
A very short one. The point she's making, and I agree with her, that the genuine belief is that it is only in a very diversified media space that you can have a very serious discussion of the causes and the climate that has led to the situation in the Middle East today. And hence, if we are to truly examine what are one of the factors, because domestic public opinion matters everywhere in the world. If there was domestic public opinion, since we cannot separate with respect what domestic channels do from what global channels do, because if the domestic channel is building up a certain sentiment in favor of a war, then inevitably there is less pressure on the government. Hence, we must examine whether the domestic channels also are asking the questions in as forthright a way. And if they don't, then one alternative is for channels like Russia today. Other channels emerging from elsewhere in the world to broadcast right into the USA, so that people there get a different perspective.
That's exactly what we're doing, and if you let me continue,